Since time immemorial, stories have connected people from the past to the present and shaped the future. Hello, I'm Joanna, and I'm on a mission to inspire, imagine, explore, and discover paths of becoming through stories and community. Now join me on a special journey with today's guest.
My name is Grant Snider. I'm an illustrator, cartoonist, and children's book author living in Wichita, Kansas. And I also have a day job as an orthodontist. Not only that, I'm a father of 5, so life is busy here, but always a lot of fun.
Imagine it's 50 years from now, and a curious young reader picks up your autobiography from the bookshelf. The reader flips to a page with a short introduction. What do you imagine you have on that page to give the reader a glimpse of who you are?
So it would have to have a drawing, maybe in panel form. And just the first thing that comes to mind is a single page comic with multiple panels walking through my journey as a young kid, reading, writing, and drawing, to an older kid trying to figure out how I wanted to use that skill and interest, to somebody maybe my current age who's early on but somewhat established career, and then somebody who's taken that passion and 50 years later and got to put an exclamation point on it by making a book about their life as a creative person. So I was quiet, goofy, creative, loved art, and eventually sports and other activities like that. I grew up in small town Kansas, had a twin brother named Gavin, and we were always super competitive in everything we did, from drawing, telling stories, racing our bikes around the block, and used that competitive urge to build off each other's skills and abilities and really do some cool stuff together. I have 2 other younger brothers, so our house was full of lots of energy. I have young boys now, so I can only imagine what my parents went through with us. But we spent a lot of time outside, not a lot of time in front of the TV. So if you ask me about a 90s TV show, although I know a few, I know a lot less than maybe some of my friends and classmates did, because a lot of our time was spent, exploring our big yard, riding our bikes, going around the neighborhood and the town, and holed up in a room drawing, inventing characters, stories, imaginary worlds. Not a whole bunch different than what I do today, really, when I draw a line from that young age to what I do now.
At what point did you realize you really loved drawing as a child?
So I think once I was in school, you always want to be defined by something, right? And so I think young kids, even, maybe as soon as like first grade or so, are looking at, okay, where do I fit in among my classmates, among my friends, among my peers? And I wanted to, be the smart kid, I guess, because I was fairly studious and nerdy as that went. But I also wanted to be the kid who could draw better than anybody. And I was, battling for that title with my brother Gavin and another student named Greg, who is another amazing artist. So I think between the 3 of us in our small town school, maybe 100 or so kids in that grade.
Oh, wow.
We were all really competing to be the best artist, at drawing whatever cartoon characters or whatever lifelike thing we could think of. And I don't know that any of us ever pulled ahead, but it was a fun thing to always be known as, hey, you were the kid that could draw.
And how old were you?
I think that became part of my identity pretty early on.
Oh, wow. How old were you at that time?
Well, I think my earliest memory of sitting down and looking at my drawing and thinking, oh, this is really cool, was probably first grade. But I know I drew long before then. And I think somewhere in those early ages, they had like different contests, like you had to draw a poster to celebrate fire safety or something.
Mm-hmm.
And my poster won, and that was, some external validation. Hey, my drawings are recognized by somebody who's not my mom or my teacher or my brother. So,
Right.
and I don't know. I think that's also maybe not the best way to go about creativity, because I think I still maybe sometimes seek that external validation a little bit too much. I should be content to just look at my own work and be like, oh, I'm happy with that. That turned out better than I expected. Not have, some higher up authority saying, oh, this is really good. But I was responding to that kind of positive criticism even at that early age too.
Yeah, I think that's a hard one. I think we all have that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so nice to hear that you had a positive encouragement on
Oh
on
yeah.
interest that was personal to you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that started with my parents too. So my mom and dad are both very creative. Neither of them necessarily draw or paint, although they probably could if they tried. But my dad was always woodworking and having handyman projects and building things. My mom gardening, doing every kind of craft imaginable as well. So just that thing of making things with your hands, I really took from them and responded to. And to this day, they're retired, they're in their backyard working for hours on end on their on their craftsman projects, which I think is pretty inspiring to see. But they always gave my brothers and I a lot of encouragement, to the point where they would have us draw like cards for birthdays and things for our relatives. And at a certain point, we realized, okay, they're having us do this, free labor, and, and push back a little bit. But at the beginning, it was really fun. Whenever there was a family birthday of a relative, we'd be drawing them a card and sending it their way. So.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Just kind of keep the creativity going too.
Yeah.
So your imagination was always free flow. There wasn't like, so there's a lot of stories about, they're talking about how against art parents are, they don't want them to be the starving artists. So it's really amazing to hear stories that we're telling aren't just for young people, but for parents to see what they can, where the kids can go if they just believe in this passion, the drive that's intrinsic to the child.
Yeah, I think it's this interesting balance that I see as a parent now of, okay, you want to encourage it and cultivate it, but if you try to, like, I have a son who's 8 who can draw and write and has a very similar brain to my own. But if I say, hey, do you want to draw this comic, or, oh, you should do this and this, that might actually have a little bit of the opposite effect of taking away some of his agency. So maybe he wouldn't want to do it because, oh, dad's saying, hey, do this. Now, that's not something I'm interested in. I want to come to it on my own. So yeah, there's that interesting balance of, obviously you don't want to discourage it. You don't want to squelch but you also maybe don't want to be too forceful of trying to direct one path or the other. So yeah, it's interesting. I think, to your point about parents and not wanting their kid to be the starving artist, I definitely had some of that was self-imposed for me. So whenever I was in high school and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with myself, maybe I was that person telling myself, oh, you shouldn't try to pursue a career in art. You don't want to become that starving artist. So it took me a long time before I realized, oh, this is a valid career path. So yeah, even if that's not coming from a family member or a teacher, even kids can kind of internalize that from them, from themselves.
The environment too.
Yeah, which is kind of a scary thing.
So I did notice, because I was watching some of your past interviews, and I think it was your first book, the basketball book that you had written.
Oh yeah. Well, maybe not my first book. So I remember one or two before that. One I had was about turkeys taking over the North Pole from Christmas, elves at Christmas. It was very confused, but kind of a science fiction holiday type thing. Thankfully lost to time, I think. But the book I've shown in public before was a story about Dennis Rodman, the basketball player.
That's the one I think I saw, yeah.
And so I was a huge basketball fan. The Bulls, as people who watched the Michael Jordan documentary that came out a couple years ago, seeing they were just huge in the late 90s. And so I took my favorite characters, Dennis Rodman and Michael Jordan, and put them in kind of detective noir novel picture book, really, for an 8th grade class project. So, and it's pretty hilarious. It's a little embarrassing, but I think just my passion about basketball and writing, came through in this really weird way that, that's pretty funny when I look back on it.
I was definitely amazed at the quality of the portraits. I was wondering, oh my God, how long has he been drawing before that? Because you don't see that kind of detail and quality from. I thought you were 6-year-old, but it sounds like you were 8.
8th grade. Yeah, 8th grade. So yeah, but I do feel like, if I tried to draw a portrait like I did back in 8th grade, I don't think it would come out as well. I'm used to drawing
very different.
Almost stick figures on the cartoon page.
So basketball and writing and a lot of imagination and art. How
Hmm.
did that transition into high school years as you're going through, physical, mental, and social development
Right.
into adulthood?
I don't know that I really found my voice, my place, my freedom of expression right away.
Mm.
I was actually thinking back to this the other day, and I did really have a pretty cool experience in high school in maybe the most boring class. So we had like a computer lab. These days I think laptops and tablets are the norm, so students are on their devices all day. But in that day and age, to be on a computer, you would actually go to a separate room, learn typing, learn Microsoft Word or whatever programs. It was maybe even before Word was as prevalent, but I spent a fair amount of time on computers when I was that age. So to me, it was the most boring thing to use these programs that were so obvious and I already knew how to learn. So, but our teacher said, okay, after you're done with the work, after you're done with the lesson, open your text document and just write. You can write whatever you want. I'll give you extra credit.
Mm.
So motivated student I was like, okay, I'm done with the assignment. I'm going to do some writing and get some extra credit. And I think I actually wrote my first like poem that wasn't assigned as anything. So yeah, I was inspired to write poetry. Not sure where that came from. Didn't get a grade for it. Didn't show it to anybody. But I still remember that poem, which was about driving on a road trip from Kansas to Colorado and seeing the mountains for the first time. And funnily enough, if you look at my most recent book of comics, The Art of Living, there's a comic strip I did for that book that's almost the exact same concept,
Oh, really?
driving across the flat, desolate landscape of Western Kansas, and then the
Mhm.
mountains appear and how inspiring of an experience that was. So from my computer applications class in high school, that was my first inspired experience with poetry.
I did realize one of the things I noticed is in order to write a lot of the comics, at least the copy portion of this, you have to be pretty observant of life. Like the
Yeah.
details are happening and the things are playing out. This is something I'm not good at. That's why I noticed this. This is something that's quite difficult, I think, for most people to actually capture it so well and so relatable.
Do
Like
you have a writing or a journaling practice that you do
I
for?
don't like no one's ever. And
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's because I was just jaded by textbooks, like
Oh yeah.
so much of the academic piece. I was that good studious kid, and I think I hated school. I just couldn't wait to get out. I think the reading and writing was about academics. I never
Oh
picked
yeah,
up
about
a
some
habit for it.
outside goal, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like poetry, all these beautiful things that you can do with language, like that wasn't part of my upbringing. So I never got a chance to really develop those good habits.
Yeah, and if it feels like work, I mean, that's the first thing you're not going to want to do. You're going to do everything but that. So, and I've
Exactly.
definitely gone through like I've always I feel like read for fun or for pleasure, but whenever I got out of school, I never wanted to look at any nonfiction, scientific textbook adjacent thing ever. So it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years or so that I have a healthy
Mhm.
distance that I can say, oh, I can read this nonfiction book and actually really enjoy it, learn about some scientific concept that I have no need to know for any reason, but oh, it's actually fun and interesting again, which
Yeah.
being a healthy distance away from having to take exams and learn for that reason has been nice.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about journaling because I remember in some of the past conversations you talked about there's no real, I guess, people call writer's block or creative block for you because you have a journal you always go back to.
Right.
Is that something
That's
that's
true. Yeah.
been
And
a practice for you?
it took me a while to figure that out, that you hear the kind of the artist stereotype is looking at the blank page in terror. And I still do a little bit of that, but if you're keeping a record of your mundane thoughts, observations, things you notice walking around the neighborhood, for me, like little doodles or small sketches as well. They can be writing and drawing in my notebooks, but then I'm never truly in front of a blank page. I can always dig back into my old sketchbooks and say, okay, this is what I was thinking about last summer. Maybe that strikes me in a different way. Maybe that inspires something. Or go back even further. This is what I was thinking about 5 years ago. I don't even remember anything about that until I see it back in the notebook form. And I don't keep very meticulous notes about, oh, this is what I ate, this is where I went, this is who I talked to. It's more reflecting on what you're seeing in the moment, putting it down. You can come back to it later and see it in a completely different way. So that's maybe when I talk to classes or when I talk to young creative people, I think that's the easiest way to start thinking like a creative person, is to have that process of maybe sitting with your sketchbook or notebook each morning, bringing it on your lunch break, jotting something down before you go to sleep at night. Doesn't have to be deep or profound, doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be just a little tidbit here and there, but that stringing those thoughts together can really make a powerful change in your life and the way you look back on it.
Right. I'm definitely gonna, like carry a pocket journal with me. I think part of it is in your mindfulness, the art of living is paying attention and slowing down and taking those quiet hours to be with yourself. Those are things that we don't pay too much attention to every day because everybody's life is so busy. Oh, yeah. Yet those habits are so important for us to really learn about who we are. So it's nice to see you got a head start and you're showing us the results and the fruits of that process, that we can all be inspired to follow suit. So I was curious, kind of going back to your school years as a student, when you were facing that choice of going to college, what should I do? That career path and, schools and majors, all those things that you were being confronted. At the same time, with this passion of art, writing, imagination, creativity, all of those things that you enjoyed, how did you go through that process and make your decision? Because you are an art orthodontist, so it's drastically a different, for me, it feels like drastically a different world from where you were thinking and enjoying the things that you were doing.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I just had no idea. And I think that's probably the most common place to be as a high school junior, senior. I had all these separate competing interests. I mean, I loved to run track, but I knew I wasn't quite good enough to do that as a college student, and certainly not, there's no real careers in that. I knew I loved science, math, that sort of thing, but I didn't have a super specific passion for like necessarily biology or physics or anything like that. So that was more just a general thought of, okay, I know I'm good at this and would probably enjoy it. I knew I liked to write and draw, but I had never found that specific way to combine those two in an enjoyable way. I thought maybe I could do like watercolors on the side, or like be kind of like a hobbyist painter and be fulfilled by that. But and I took a stab at that, but it just didn't quite click. I hadn't discovered cartooning, book writing and illustrating. So that wasn't even on my radar, even though looking back now, it's pretty obvious that I could have tried that and had fun with it. So I picked chemical engineering, combined science, math, etc. There was a bioengineering path, and maybe just the word bioengineering sounded cool. As silly as that sounds, I didn't quite know what it was, but I thought, oh, they're taking engineering concepts and applying them to medicine. That seems like a cool futuristic type thing. So yeah, I chose that, and I went to the University of Kansas, the big state school, which is great university to be at. A lot of people, energy, plenty of people to encounter different than myself and my background, and that was just really neat to be exposed to that environment. But I got to engineering school and realized I'm fairly adept at this. I can do it, but it's not bringing me joy. It's certainly not my passion. And I could probably grit it out and make it through and get my degree and go work in this field, but that's not really what I want to do long term. And yet I hadn't found my artistic pursuit either. So I was still doing things on the side and just kind of playing around with watercolor paints or things like that. I started dating Kayla, who eventually became my wife, and she had a family member who worked with dentists and said, oh, this is pretty cool, check it out. Went and shadowed a few. I realized, oh, that's neat. It's hands-on. There's a craftsman aspect to it. There's quite a bit of science in it, really no math, which is okay, I guess. Let me try that. So I got down that path. And around the time I was applying and getting into dental school, I submitted a drawing to my local student, or to the university newspaper, a cartoon. They published it. I saw my drawing in print. The external, gratification again, right? Yeah. And I realized, okay, it's pretty cool to see my words, my drawings being read by a bunch of students. So I started drawing for them, for the student newspaper, 5 days a week, which is kind of a crazy schedule. Occasionally I'd hit upon like a good idea. Most of them were not great, but it was fun. I was having a lot of enjoyment from it. And I realized, okay, I'm getting into dental school. This path's underway. Now I found cartooning. Now I discovered this artistic outlet that's really feels like me. How can I keep both of these things going?
So this is since college. What year were you in college?
Junior year would have been the year that I knew I had gotten into dental school. I did an early admissions program. And then junior year, basically the whole school year, I drew a daily, 5 days a week comic for the student news, or I say comic. They were mostly single panel cartoons, not comic strips. Yeah.
You refer to your comics as incidental comic. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started?
So, have you ever played in a band before, like a rock band? That's a silly question.
I heard of rock bands, but I never played.
You never played one? Yeah, and I don't play any instruments, but for a time I was like pretending to play bass in my twin brother's band. And so like the hardest part for me was not actually playing the instrument because I never took the time to learn it. It was coming up with a name for the band. It's almost like naming a child. Like you go through like hundreds of different combinations, and there's that perfect one out there, but you don't quite know what it is. And so we never came up with a really good name for the band. The band, disbanded anyway. Whenever I was realizing, I could put my drawings online, I needed some name for them. And I could not for the life of me think of what to call it. So I came up with Incidental Comics, which was a play on like incidental music, which if you watch a movie, it's the music that's playing in the background and kind of setting the mood, something kind of in the background that's being not noticed or observed. The word incidental has dental in it, which, that's kind of a pun that I snuck in there that nobody will notice but me. I like the punning aspect of it. And then it kind of sounds like in football, there's a penalty for incidental contact. So maybe those three things, a couple plays on words, realize, okay, this is an okay name for a comic.
That's awesome. That's a good one.
So yeah, I don't think I've ever explained it in that detail to anybody. So I apologize for having to make you listen to that. But
no, I was actually, it was so funny because I was like, oh my God, I need to know about this term.
Yeah. So now it's just something that I came up with, 12 years ago that stuck. So I don't think about it much, but
no, it's awesome.
Comics. Yeah. And then comics just defined, okay, it's drawings and words and panels. So versus like cartoons, like if you see a New Yorker cartoon, it's usually one panel, one person talking in that panel. There's no progression of time or a character moving. So.
And what about your style? How has your style, I'm embarrassed, but I actually own The Quiet Power.
Oh, cool. Oh yeah. That's awesome.
I never made the connection, but it was, I don't know why I never made the connection, but for those who don't know, Grant is also the illustrator for illustrations on the Quiet Power book by Susan Cain. And I love her work. And then I was reading your, here's all the tabs.
Oh, wow.
But I saw her name in the back. I don't know why. I never went back to look. But I was really curious about your style. How did your style came to be? Because it looked very different from your eighth grade
Oh
book.
yeah, there was no real photorealistic drawings of Dennis Rodman and Michael Jordan. I think every artist, cartoonist, musician, writer, etc., develops their style through imitation first, because the idea that somebody would start a artistic pursuit and have this fully formed style is just completely not realistic. There's maybe a couple people out there who can do that, but yeah, pretty much. I think most people learn by doing, and by doing, you're copying or imitating the work of people you love. And I always go back to a handful of different cartoonists who are all pretty well known, who's at different times in my drawing life, I looked at their work and I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want my stuff to look or be just as good as this. How can I take some of their ideas, take some of their style and make that my own? Which is, stealing in a way, but not in a malicious way. You're not plagiarizing. You're not passing their work off as your own. You're just borrowing until you can become a little bit more full as an artist.
You're internalizing that spirit.
Yeah. And as much as you want to draw like your favorite artist, right, or like your favorite writer, it's always going to come out a little bit different, not quite the same, with a bit too much of you put into it.
Right. And you're completely self-taught,
yeah,
right? You didn't go to an art school.
In the terms of cartoonist, I don't know that I know there are some programs in how to be a cartoonist and draw comics and things, but
Hmm.
I would think 90 some percent of all cartoonists out there are self-taught because it's something you can't really learn unless you're actually creating new things and trying things and failing, etc. There's no great authority of cartooning saying, oh, well, you have to do your panels like this or your characters have to look kind of like this, because that would just take all the joy and the life out of it. Yeah. So the people I've stolen, borrowed, imitated, etc. And I'll just, apologies to these people, because if you look at certain strips, you'll be like, oh, it looks just like, early on it was Roz Chast, who draws for the New Yorker. She has some amazing graphic novels and has drawn cartoons for the New Yorker magazine for, I
Hmm.
think, since the 70s or 80s. And I just love her weird humor and scratchy lines. And if you look at a Roz Chast drawing, you're not going to confuse it with anybody else's, and that's really cool. Matt Groening, who created The Simpsons, which obviously everybody knows The Simpsons, right? He also had
Hmm.
a a comic strip called Life in Hell that was in like alt weeklies, the little newspapers you would see on city streets for free. I think he drew that for quite a long time, even after his massive success with The Simpsons. And it's these strange bunnies with Simpson character like eyes, and it's pretty dark. Nothing at all like my own work, but it was one of the first comic strips I read and was like, okay, that's really cool. Tom Gauld is a British cartoonist who's more of a contemporary. I think he's been doing it, probably quite a bit longer than I have, but he does literary comics. And I saw his stuff and it was like, okay, I love the precision of his line, wry humor. I love the way he takes the literary world and puts his spin on it. That's something I would love to try to do too.
That's awesome.
And there's more, but I'll stop there.
No, it's great because I think we grow on other people's idea, and that's how innovations, I guess, happen, right? For the most part,
Yeah,
you got to build on something to get to the next level. So it's
exactly.
good to hear that process applies to how you can self teach yourself. Well, you can teach yourself how to be a cartoonist and be inspired, and hopefully inspire other people to be on top of your style.
Yeah, and if you hear about, like, okay, a famous invention, like you hear about Thomas Edison stealing the light bulb from all these other people. Well, I would argue that the majority of great inventions out there are basically borrowed, stolen, remixed from all these other things. And our notion of creativity is this like divine thing that just falls upon a creative person, I think is pretty misleading.
Yeah, we definitely need to start having different narratives about that one.
Knock the
Because I
pedestals off
think,
of us creative.
because I think it actually leads into something I believe you mentioned earlier about self doubt.
Uh-huh.
And also, I believe I read it in here. There was a comic about self doubt, and I'm curious, how do you deal with that? Because you are a very public figure. You put your work out there, even on Instagram, right? You'll get comments, you'll get people's feedback about how they feel. And you're
Yeah,
on these interviews and you're in videos. Like, how do you work with that? And I think that's something that all of us deal with. And so I'm
right.
curious, as a creative, what do you do to address that piece?
Well, that's the idea of the imaginary audience, right? So if you're somebody about to make something, you can envision, okay, well, who's all going to read this? Maybe my classmates will see me give this presentation, and what are they going to think? What if
Mhm,
I post this online and a bunch of people read it? Well, what are the negative reactions going to be? What if I
mhm,
go up on stage here, and what if I say something silly? Like, how are people going to respond? So that imagined audience, if you make it big,
mhm,
self-doubt just goes right in there, right? Like,
mhm,
so I think that what's helpful for me, at least when I'm able to do it, is turn off the idea of the imagined audience. Because yeah, there is hopefully going to be an audience for it, but if I'm trying to think about that when I'm putting the idea on paper, it's either going to come out to be the most bland and generic thing ever, or I'm just not going to ever put a line down. So
mhm.
I
Right.
think taking that audience and still having one, but making it much smaller is really helpful. So maybe you're writing for somebody in your life. Like for me, I know I'm going to show, before I send it out into the digital ether, I'm
Mhm.
going to show my wife Kayla, my brother Gavin. I want to get their opinions, because like I've
Right.
talked about a lot of times, they have both very strong opinions about my stuff, but completely different perspectives and brains, and they're
Mhm.
going to interpret it in different ways. So I know if that audience of two, if both of them like it, it has a good chance of being liked by that bigger audience. If
Right.
one likes it, one doesn't get it, maybe it needs some work. If they both say, oh, I don't think this is very good or interesting, maybe I need to start from scratch and rethink it. And it doesn't have to be like a family member or friend necessarily. It could be like a professional relationship, like an editor or somebody or a client or somebody you're working for. But knowing, okay, I need to make this for one or two people whose opinion I really value and admire, that really narrows your scope of who you're trying to impress and appeal to. And it's kind of freeing in a way.
That's true. Have a tribe of people who you can trust and filter through, and focus on the people who you really want to talk to, and like let go of the other noises, I guess.
And it can be like, oh, okay, I imagine this ideal reader, like, okay, this person has really good taste. What are they going to think of the work I'm doing? Will they be impressed by it? Will they think, oh, it's not up to your standards? So
yeah, there's so much negativity everywhere. So you can't let those noise pull you down.
And two, like, I mean, there's going to be negative comments or somebody who's going to say, oh, this is just like this thing I read, et cetera, or this is wrong for this reason. And I probably do a poor job of responding to those, but I don't know. You can either respond to them politely or ignore them, but to try to engage those and argue with those people, you're not going to live a happy, creative life if you're always trying to please those voices who are speaking out against you. That said, I mean, if there's a bunch of people who have the same opinion, maybe it's worth examining and thinking, oh, did I put something in here that I didn't intend to, or do I need to rethink my views on something? So
that makes a lot of sense. And with that, if you were to talk to your high school self, because I think that was kind of the point where you had to make a lot of decisions for your life and where you're going, and you were somewhat confused for a moment about what's ahead of you and what you should do. Knowing what you know now, like, how would you talk to yourself? Like, what advice would you give?
Be more enthusiastic. So this may be more apply to teenage boys. I don't know, or maybe kids are different these days. But so like, as a 17 or 18-year-old boy, you're way too cool for everything around you, for people older than you, for people younger than you, for your peers, for whatever, is not within your really narrow range of vision. So I think I would go back and tell myself to be enthusiastic about more things, to not be afraid to show your passion or interest for things. And that's different, I think, than the advice of like, oh, follow your passion or follow what makes you happy. Because like I've heard a lot of people say recently, which I respond to, that's follow your passion is great if you know exactly what that is. But if you don't know what that is, that's going to be horrible advice. I think it's the author and thinker Kevin Kelly would say this really well recently. Follow your passion is only useful once you know exactly what that passion might be. Before that, I think you just have to be enthusiastic in every challenge and every discipline you encounter. And from that, maybe you'll stumble upon your passion, like I thankfully did with cartooning. But I definitely wouldn't go back and tell myself, oh, you need to start drawing cartoons, because I don't know that that's a realistic thing to do.
That's so valuable. I mean, I remember I was about almost turning 30, and I was hearing all these talks so I was in a high-tech industry. And so you hear from like Steve Jobs, like all the big folks talking about following your passion, that passion word. And then I was like, okay, what is my passion? I scrambled looking for passion. I wasn't satisfied of being a corporate marketing professional, and I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder. That wasn't going to make me happy. And for the last 10 years, I've been asking, okay, what is my passion? And to your point, it's not about searching for passion. It's about being curious, explore, right? Experience life, because you don't know what you don't know. So when you're searching within your scope of knowing, you're limiting yourself with a handful of things that you already know. You can't look beyond it because you don't know what's out there. So thank you for that advice. I think it would have been very useful back in the days when I had to figure out.
Do you feel like you ever found that quote unquote passion that we're kind of
I'm still on that.
But you have the enthusiasm and curiosity, right?
But I think what's more important is, I think, purpose. How do I see myself? Like, what's my role in this lifetime? Like, what can I do to help others, to understand myself better, to see the world beyond what I already know? And I think that's the beauty of having these conversations, is we all come from a very different background. Even if we're the same culture, We still have different family background upbringing from our parents. And I think being able to talk to folks and push the boundary of our thinking is extremely important, especially for young people today, because there's a lot of singular narratives, and having algorithms serving up information that are very personalized to your behavior already is a self-forming bubble, which is pretty dangerous, I think, for our society.
And I do think curiosity means encountering like people who have completely different viewpoints than your own, and not engaging them in a shouting match online necessarily. So, and I think this is probably done better in person, like with a more natural relationship than on the internet, but somebody in your life who sees the world in such a different way. But if you can be curious about that, you don't necessarily have to try to be convinced by them or try to convince them of what you think. Just that curiosity. So that's something I'm trying to figure out these days, because it's challenging, but I do think that's best done away from Twitter.
Your latest book with the audience. Well, first of all, I started with The Shape of Ideas, and the cover captured my attention right away. I found this in a local bookstore when I took my kids to go book shopping, and so this was where it all started. Having gotten to know more of you, I learned about your recent books, which I think, is it April when it was published, The Art of Living?
Yeah.
And so that's now on my bookshelf. And I also noticed that you are doing children's books. Can you talk a little bit about your picture books? And your latest just came out in June.
So that book is called One Boy Watching. It's about my experiences riding the bus through the Kansas countryside as a young kid. So it was taken from memory, from observation of where I live now again, now that I moved back home. And so that was pretty fun for me to turn those very specific memories into a fully formed picture book. That was the fourth book I've done with Chronicle books. I did two called a pair called What Color is Night and What Sound is Morning, which are almost like a poem to nighttime, a poem to morning, illustrated, of course. And then I did a book called There is a Rainbow, which I illustrated. It was written by Teresa Trinder, and it was about the COVID-19 pandemic and just kind of a hopeful message there. I've done a couple other children's books, one called Blue Floats Away, written by Travis Yonker, which is about an iceberg that melts and transforms. And that was fun because I got to cut up paper and just try a bunch of different new art techniques. And then I wrote and drew one called My Words, which is about a young girl discovering language and learning, okay, when I was a baby, I spoke like this. Then I grew up and I got words, and now I can read and write and use words in these ways. So they're all very different but fun projects. I feel like picture books are kind of like a second language for me. Cartooning and comics are my first one. Picture books were almost like putting on a different costume, when I sat down at the drawing table. So I still have so much to learn, but it's a really fun process to come up with these ideas and write and draw 32 to 40 page children's pictures.
The comic books come from your collection of journals, the live recordings.
Right.
So for picture book, where do your ideas, where do you draw that piece from?
So pretty much the same, but they have to just be a more intense idea, I would say, because instead of spending an afternoon or a day or even a week or so on an idea, I have to spend months and months with it. So it has to be a bigger narrative. It has to have more detail and specificity. But yeah, they do still come from the same place, which is, for instance, for the What Color is Night, it was walking around my neighborhood at nighttime, looking at different lights and colors. And I thought, oh, we think of nighttime as this dark and colorless time, but there's all these amazing sights and colors and different facets to it you don't think of. So yeah, it always does start with that observation, with the sketchbook and with the journaling part of it.
So that journaling piece, very handy to start collecting our creativity and thoughts.
Yeah.
So maybe lastly then, if for people who would like to follow this career path, this creative career path, what would you suggest? Like, where's a good place for them to start? In addition to start journaling and practicing drawing, like what else can they do?
I think a fun thing to do, although going back to self-doubt, a bit of a challenging thing is to, once you make those early attempts at your art, at your creativity, to share it with people, your friends and family, to start, to share it with strangers, to put it on the internet. That's the beautiful thing about the hugely interconnected world we live in. That's even quite a bit different than when I first started making things, is that if you put something up consistently and are devoted to that body of work, you can eventually have an audience that's as big as the entire world. And that's maybe not what you want to focus on right at the start, but eventually, you know, once you're ready to share it, once you're ready to put it out there, anybody, anytime, anywhere in the world can see your art. And I think that's just one of the cool things that we forget, because we're so inundated with social media and stuff, is, oh, this is actually really neat that I can post and somebody in India can see that 5 seconds later.
And do you think you'll ever be a full-time artist?
Well, it already feels like full-time now. So,
or two full-time jobs, I guess.
Yeah, I've tricked myself into working 2, and 3 if you count the picture books now. But no, I have a great schedule. I work soon to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at home in my drawing studio, which is my 6-year-old's bedroom, actually, working on books and comics for 3 days a week. And then Thursday and Friday, I'll spend at the orthodontic office doing braces and jotting down spare ideas in my notebooks over my lunch break. So yeah, it's really approaching that point. And
wow.
I'm really excited to see where it takes me over the next time period of making.
Yeah, that's amazing. And where's the best place for us for all the listeners to follow your work?
You can see my weekly comic strips on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Twitter at Grant Draws on Twitter and Instagram, and then at Incidental Comics on Tumblr and Facebook, as well as my website, incidentalcomics.com. I try to post one new thing a week. That's my challenge that I hope to continue my entire life. We'll see. And for all the books you mentioned, you can find them just anywhere books are sold, at your local bookstore or online as well.
Well, thank you so much, Grant. It's been pretty amazing for me. I don't get to talk to famous people a lot. So
well, thanks, Joanna. This has been fun. I love your questions and to hear some about your creative journey as well. And yeah, it's just inspiring to hear that what you're going through is what I've gone through, and what some of your listeners will experience as well, as they're, you know, enriching their curiosity and pursuing their creative passions as well.
I hope you enjoyed the stories from Grant as much as I had. And I'd like to end with one of his comics. It's called Finding Your Voice. Speak softly. Carry a big megaphone. Speak reasonably, but stay open to nonsense. Speak uniquely. Find your own voice. Speak confidently. Be aware of the echoes of self-doubt. Speak simply. Words are easily twisted. Speak passionately. Let your words be illuminated. Speak moderately. Don't get drunk off the sound of your voice. Speak your mind, then listen. So remember, make time to listen from within and stay curious and be well.